Oh, hey there. It's great to see you again. Come on in. Let's have some fun. Hey guys, and welcome back to another Mystery Monday. We are going to get into the conclusion of The Princes in the Tower here in just a little bit. I hope you guys all had a great weekend. I hope you guys are enjoying life right now, that it's being good to you. 2021 is off to a decent start. Let's do just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into this. So I am working on Life is What You Bake It from Diamond Art Club. I will link it down in the description box. My pen is from Amazon. It's the same one I've been using. I will link it again. I haven't finished Arctic Wolves. I just moved that to my downstairs setup. But who's ready for the rest of the theories regarding the princes in the tower? Here we go. Okay, guys. So we left off having finished up with the theory that Richard III had murdered his nephews. Let's look at some of the other possible theories as to what happened to Edward and Richard in the Tower of London. The plausibility of Henry Stafford, the second Duke of Buckingham, Richard's right-hand man, as a suspect depends on the princes having already been dead by the time Stafford was executed in 1483. It has been suggested that Buckingham had several possible motives. As a descendant of Edward III, through John of Gaunt, 1st Duke of Lancaster, and Thomas of Woodstock, the 1st Duke of Gloucester, on his father's side, as well as through John of Gaunt, through John Beaufort, son of John of Gaunt, on his mother's side, Buckingham may have hoped to accede to the throne himself in due course. Alternatively, he may have been acting on behalf of a third party. Some, notably Paul Murray Kendall, regard Buckingham as the likeliest suspect. His execution after he had rebelled against Richard in October of 1483 might signify that he and the king had fallen out. Alison Weir takes this as a sign that Richard had murdered the princes without Buckingham's knowledge, and Buckingham was pissed. A contemporary Portuguese document suggests Buckingham as the guilty party, stating, "And after the passing away of King Edward in the year of 83, another one of his brothers, the Duke of Gloucester, had in his power the Prince of Wales and the Duke of York, the young sons of the said king his brother, and turned them to the Duke of Buckingham, under whose custody the said princes were starved to death." Well, that would be a crappy way to die. Especially at such a young age. No, thank you. A document dated some decades after the disappearance was found within the archives of the College of Arms in London in 1980, stating that the murder be the vise of the Duke of Buckingham. This led Michael Bennett to suggest that possibly some of Richard's prominent supporters, Buckingham and Tyrrell, murdered the princes on their own without waiting for Richard's orders. Bennett noted in support of this theory, after the king's departure, Buckingham was in effective command in the capital, and it's known that when the two men met a month later, there was an unholy row between them. So it could make sense. I mean, I'd be pretty pissed if I had handed over my nephews for, safekeeping and imprisonment, only to find out that you decided to take it upon yourself to murder them. Like, that's not what you were supposed to be doing. That's not what was requested of you. Buckingham is the only person to be named as responsible in a contemporary chronicle other than Richard himself. However, for two reasons, he is unlikely to have acted alone. First of all, if he were guilty of acting without Richard's orders, it is extremely surprising that Richard did not lay the blame for the prince's murder on Buckingham after Buckingham was disgraced and executed, especially as Richard could have potentially cleared his own name by doing so. Secondly, it is likely he would have required Richard's help to gain access to the princes under close guard in the Tower. Although Kendall argued as Constable of England, he might have been exempt from the ruling that said nobody can access them. Nobody can see them. As a result, although it is extremely possible that he was implicated in the decision to murder them, the hypothesis that he acted without Richard's knowledge is not widely accepted by historians. While Jeremy Potter suggested that Richard would have kept silent had Buckingham been guilty because nobody would have believed Richard was not party to the crime, he further notes that historians are agreed that Buckingham would never have dared to act without Richard's complicity, or at least connivance. However, Potter also hypothesized that perhaps Buckingham was fantasizing about seizing the crown himself at this point and saw the murder of the princes as the first step in achieving this goal. This theory formed the basis of Sharon Penman's historical novel, The Sun in Splendor. So, I tend to follow the historical view here of, Buckingham had his head so far up Richard's ass at this point, there's no way he would have murdered the princes without Richard's knowledge and permission and orders. It could have very easily been the beginning of the end of their partnership, but there's no way he would have acted alone. I just don't see it. Henry VII, however, the first Henry Tudor, is a different story. Henry Tudor, following his seizure of the crown, executed some of the rival claimants to the throne. John of Gloucester, illegitimate son of Richard III, is said by some sources to have been one of those executed. Henry was out of the country between the prince's disappearance and August 1485, thus his only opportunity to murder them would have been after he ascended to the throne in 1485. Pollard suggests Henry, or those acting on his orders, is the only plausible alternative to Richard. And if the princes were murdered, I have to agree. Because as it just stated, and as I pointed out several times in the previous video, last week's Mystery Monday, Henry would not have allowed anyone to live that could have taken the throne from him. He had just taken the throne from Richard. His claim to the throne was tenuous. He had very little support at this time. There's no way he would have allowed the princes to live. It's just not. It's not possible. It also, these next things that he did, he wouldn't have done if he believed them to be alive. The year after becoming king, Henry married the prince's eldest sister, Elizabeth of York, to reinforce his claim to the throne. Not wanting the legitimacy of his wife, or her claim to the throne as heir of Edward IV called into question, prior to the marriage, he repealed the Titulus Regulus, which had previously declared the princes and Elizabeth illegitimate. Sorry, y'all. Markham suggests the princes were executed under Henry's orders between June 16th and July 16th, 1486, claiming that it was only after this date that orders went out to circulate the story that Richard had killed the princes. Again, he wouldn't have declared them legitimate unless he knew they were dead, or at least had reason to believe they were dead, because it's too much of a threat to his throne. They could have been found, come back, escaped, been rescued, and taken the crown from him. Like, his claim wasn't that great, even with his marriage to Elizabeth. So, okay. So, Markham also claims that the prince's mother, Elizabeth Woodville, knew that the story was false, and so Henry had to have her silenced. And that's why Henry decided in February of 1487 to take all of Elizabeth Woodville's lands and possessions and confine her to Bermondsey Abbey, where she died 6 years later. However, Arlene Okerlund suggests that her retirement to the Abbey was her own decision, and I have a hard time believing that anybody would force Elizabeth Woodville to do anything she didn't want to do. I'm just saying, that was a strong, powerful, manipulative, conniving woman. If she didn't want to go, she wasn't going to go. While Michael Bennett and Timothy Elston suggest the move was precautionary, precipitated by Lambert Simnel's claim to be her son Richard. Pollard claims Markham's theory highly speculative and states that Henry's silence over the princes was likely more political calculation than personal guilt. Henry was also never accused of the murder by any contemporary, not even his enemies, which he likely would have been had contemporaries thought there was any possibility of his guilt. Jeremy Potter, at the time he wrote chairman of the Richard III Society, noted, with Henry as with Richard, there is no real evidence, and one must suspect that if he had killed the princes himself, he would quickly have produced the corpses and some ingeniously appropriate story implicating Richard. Further, Raphael Holinshed reported in 1577 that Richard purged and declared his innocence regarding the murder of his nephews toward the world, indicating that the boys did indeed meet their end during Richard's days. It is also unlikely that the princes would have been kept alive in secret by Richard for 2 years after their last sighting, while rumors of his responsibility for their murder circulated. That one I don't know about. Richard was kind of a dick, but, modern society views Richard as a dick because of the propaganda campaign by Henry and the belief that he murdered his nephews. So maybe he wasn't that much of a dick. Some writers have also accused John Howard, the first Duke of Norfolk, Margaret Beaufort, Henry VII's mother, who was like a huge bitch, and Jane Shore, Edward IV's mistress. Pollard writes of these theories, none deserve serious consideration. The problem with all of these accusations is that they beg the question of access to the tower without Richard's knowledge and overlook the fact that Richard was responsible for the safekeeping of his nephews. The Beaufort theory has more recently been supported by Philippa Gregory in her BBC documentary series, The Real White Queen and Her Rivals, but is not supported by any evidence other than a speculative one of possible motive. Motive being she wanted to secure the throne for her son. Historian David Baldwin suggests Henry VII's reticence on the subject may have been due to the fact that at least one of the princes was still alive. He considers that the likelier candidate for survival would be Richard, and that Edward may have died of a malady. Baldwin argues that it is impossible that no one knew what happened to the princes after they entered the tower. And that I have to agree with, because there are far too many people running around back then that have their noses into business that does not belong to them. And for a lot of them, it cost them their head. So, yeah. It's impossible that no one back then knew what happened to the princes. Baldwin believes Richard III and Henry VII that their leading courtiers and their mothers would have all known the boys' whereabouts and welfare. He argues that had this been the case, Henry VII would have had the choice of keeping quiet about the survival of Richard or having him executed, and concluded he would have been happy to let people think the boys had been murdered, but not to speculate when or by whose hand. So basically, Baldwin is saying that Richard escaped or survived somehow. Henry knew that Richard was alive. The courtiers for Richard III and Henry VII knew Edward was alive. Edward and Richard's mother knew that Richard was alive and knew where Richard was. And Henry VII just was happy to let everybody believe that Richard III had killed his nephews, because if people believed they were dead, they weren't going to rise up against him. Which is an interesting theory. During the reign of Henry VII, two individuals claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, who had somehow escaped death. Lambert Simnel initially claimed to be Richard, before changing his story and claiming to be Edward Plantagenet, the 17th Earl of Warwick. Perkin Warbeck later claimed to be Richard, appearing in Ireland and calling himself King Richard IV. Margaret of York, who was the Duchess of Burgundy, formally recognized Warbeck as Richard. She was Richard III's sister and an unrelenting opponent of Henry VII. Warbeck was also accepted as Richard by James IV of Scotland, and after a failed attempt to invade England, he was captured and retracted his claims. He was imprisoned and later executed. Most people believe he was an impostor whose supporters accepted his claim only because of political reasons. The fact that two persons claimed to be Richard led the 18th century writer Horace Walpole to argue that Richard had in fact escaped death and that Warbeck genuinely was Richard, a view also supported by the Scottish historian Malcolm Lang. Walpole, however, later retracted his views and stated that he now believed the princes to have been murdered by Richard III to secure his hold on the crown. In more recent times, the theory that Warbeck was Richard has been endorsed by Annette Carson, a freelance writer with a lifelong interest in Richard III. She suggested Richard smuggled the princes abroad into the custody of their aunt, the Duchess of Burgundy, and they were raised there under false identities. Baldwin's theory was that by having removed them from sight to prevent them being a focus for opposition, he was unable to bring them back to the court to scotch rumors of their murder without once again having them become a threat. The political reality of the disappearance of the princes, whatever happened to them, is that they were believed to have been murdered and Richard was blamed for their murders. Even if he had not been directly responsible for their deaths, the fact that he had deposed them and kept them under tight guard made him responsible for their welfare in the eyes of contemporaries, and the belief that they had been murdered made him guilty by negligence, if not malice. Baldwin noted in his support of his conclusion that Richard would not have murdered the princes, "It seems incredible Richard ever supposed killing his nephews would help secure him his position or make him more acceptable to his subjects." An initial uprising in September of 1483, aimed at deposing Richard and restoring Edward V to the throne, was not stopped by rumors of Edward's murder. Instead, the rebels rallied around Henry Tudor as a potential alternative candidate. Horrocks says Tudor was an inconceivable choice if Edward and his brother were thought to be still available. Anthony Cheetham, who considered Richard likely to have had the princes murdered, commented that it was a colossal blunder. Nothing else could have prompted the deflated Woodvilles to hitch themselves to Henry Tudor's bandwagon. The fact that the majority of the rebels were wealthy and powerful southern noblemen loyal to Edward IV suggests a degree of revulsion against Richard's usurpation of the throne. Their willingness to fight on under an implausible alternative candidate suggests that they regarded anyone as preferable to Richard as king due to his usurpation and the murder of his nephews. Bennett suggested that perhaps those who had initially supported Richard in his seizure of power may have felt complicit in the crime, which he thought might explain the bitterness of the subsequent recriminations against him. Hicks speculated that these men may have been appalled by the character of the regime, shocked by Richard's crimes. Their defection severely weakened Richard, and he had to impose his supporters from the northern lords as office holders in the southern counties in order to maintain order, which was in itself a very unpopular act that further damaged his reputation. In Pollard's words, the belief that he had murdered his nephews seriously handicapped Richard's efforts to secure himself on the throne he had usurped. So basically, karma, jumped up and bit him in the ass. Seriously. England is sitting here saying, you imprisoned and murdered your nephews and you want us to support you. Screw you. We're going to go support this other guy who's been living in France and on the mainland for so long because we don't like you. And his claim to the throne is so much weaker. But he's not you. He didn't murder his nephews. Everything that Richard did to try and maintain his power only cost him more power. It's complete karma. Complete karma. But I do want to take some time now and look a little bit more into some of the other theories. I found an article that was written in 2015. And it says, will the ultimate cold case finally be solved after more than 500 years? Perhaps the greatest of all cold cases. Who was responsible for the death of the two princes in the tower? Historians who believe their disappearance will forever remain a mystery should think again. Philippa Langley, the historian and screenwriter who spearheaded the Looking for Richard project that resulted in one of the greatest historical discoveries of modern times, the grave of Richard III, located beneath a car park in Leicester, is back once more attempting to crack the case. It is widely assumed the Plantagenet King Richard III killed his nephews in the summer of 1483 after their father, Edward IV, died. 12-year-old Edward V, expecting his coronation, was taken to the Tower of London along with his 9-year-old brother Richard, Duke of York, but the accession never occurred. The death of the two boys remains one of the great mysteries in British history. Miss Langley will announce details of the new quest today during celebrations marking the 530th anniversary of the Battle of Bosworth, the last significant battle in the War of the Roses in which Richard III was killed and Henry VII ascended to the throne. I have 3 key lines of investigation, 2 that have never been investigated before, she said. There are a couple of European lines of inquiry that are looking very interesting. We do know that Richard III's successor, Henry Tudor, tried to destroy all copies of Henry's legal right to the throne, the Titulus Regius. What we don't know is how much of the other paperwork he destroyed quietly behind the scenes. So we're hoping that further destruction might not have taken place on the continent. There might be more information available over there. Some British families with private archives dating to the Plantagenet and Tudor periods are also coming forward to open their doors to Miss Langley and her research team. We now have this incredible network of specialists around the world who are willing, ready, and able to start new research into the princes. They just need to be told when, where, and how, and they're ready to get on with it. This is a pure research project, and it's exciting in that we can go into it with a focus on this particular mystery. Miss Langley said she will be teaming up with professional cold case investigators, some of whom will work with police on unsolved murder. When you keep the paper historians out of it and ask those whose job it is to look into cold case histories, like the police, lawyers, and private investigators, they all say the same thing. It's very questionable whether there was a murder at all, considering what happened with all the pretenders that arrived under Henry Tudor's reign. And second, that Richard III is not their prime suspect, because they go on motive, opportunity, and proclivity. I'll be using cold case history specialists because this project needs to go in places it has never gone before. The team will be putting together a research document in the coming weeks before the investigation officially begins. Miss Langley hopes to team up again with the Richard III Society, which has also begun a major new research project into scoliosis, the abnormal curvature of the spine of which Richard III suffered a severe form. One area where no researcher will be allowed to investigate is the Henry VII Lady Chapel in Westminster Abbey, where the bones said to belong to the princes were interred by Charles II 4 years after the discovery in 1674 of 2 children's skeletons. Their remains were found by workmen 10 feet under the staircase leading to the chapel of the White Tower. The Church of England, supported by the Queen, has repeatedly refused requests to exhume the remains so that forensic tests can be carried out. Miss Langley will be joined on stage at the anniversary weekend by the best-selling novelist and historian Philippa Gregory, discussing why the Plantagenet and Tudor periods retain such a fascination for the public. Miss Langley said, "Philippa is fascinated by the princes as well. You can imagine how much research she has carried out for her novels, and from all of that she believes Perkin Warbeck, arguably the most famous of the pretenders that emerged during Henry VII's reign, who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York, was in fact the younger prince." During this weekend's celebration, Miss Langley will also give the first public reading of the poem by Poet Laureate Carol Ann Duffy and read by Benedict Cumberbatch, a distant relation of Richard III, at the King's reinterment in March. It was subsequently dedicated to Miss Langley for all her work during the Looking for Richard project. Miss Langley said she's determined to once again right a historical wrong. Again, Richard III was kind of smeared by Henry VII through all of this. But that article was from 2015 and there's no updates, which means, guess what? They haven't found anything yet. They never found anything. I'm looking at some other stuff here, trying to see. Let's see. What does this article talk about? Bones were reburied. Yeah, we don't know who killed them, and we might never know. Like all of this was happening towards the end of the War of the Roses. People did not want there were so many people constantly going back and forth over the over the throne. It was just a mess. And nobody would have wanted to keep anyone around that could have had a stronger claim to the throne, because everybody, of course, wants to keep their power. That's just what it's all about. But let me know sorry, I got a tickle in the back of my throat. Let me know in the comments whether you think the princes died of natural causes, whether you think they escaped and survived, whether you think Edward died but Richard escaped and survived, or whether you think Henry or Richard murdered them. Because I'd love to know your theories on this. I tend to believe that Edward died and Richard might have escaped with some help. A lot of the contemporary historians make a strong point for why Perkin Warbeck could have been Richard, Duke of York. And yeah, I know it says that he confessed that he wasn't and he retracted his claim. But think about it. He was imprisoned by this other person and he didn't want to be killed. He had a wife and all of that. So as soon as he retracted his claim, Henry let him out. And he lived at court for a while under supervision, but he lived at court until he, fled, and then he was captured and thrown back in the tower, and he tried to escape again. And that's when he was finally killed. It wasn't until, years after his initial claims that he was killed. Like, he started making claims in 1495. He wasn't killed until 1499. He retracted his claims in 1497. And we can get into him a little bit more. Maybe on Wednesday for the Whip and Chat, we'll get into him a little bit. What do you think? But for now, I think it's totally possible that he truly was Richard. And if he wasn't, if they were in fact murdered, I think it was Richard III. There's no reason for him to have lived so long with all of these accusations that he murdered his nephews running around with him not, if they were alive, why would he not have produced them and said, look, here they are. I didn't murder my nephews. So hate me for taking the throne from them, but they're not dead. If he didn't murder them, then there is no reason for him to sit there and live with the accusations that he had murdered them. It makes no sense. I don't... Henry has more motive to murder them, just to eliminate all the threats of people who could take his throne. And why... But again, if they were still alive, why would he have re-legitimized them? by doing so, by declaring them legitimate in strengthening Elizabeth's claim to the throne, for when he married her, he strengthened their claim to the throne. There's no way he would have done that if he thought they were still alive. We just have to look at this critically. We are never going to know for certain what happened to them, because the bones that have been found, I don't think Queen Elizabeth is ever going to let us examine them. It's possible that Charles or William might, but a lot of it depends on public pressure and really how much they care about getting to the bottom of this. It's not a matter of simply clearing Richard's name, because honestly, in my mind, he's partially responsible. Like, if they died of natural causes, he threw them in there. He didn't make sure they were taken care of. If they were murdered, it had to have happened during his reign. There's no reason for him to sit there and not produce them. If Richard escaped and Henry died, he's still responsible for the fact that, or not Henry, Edward. If Richard escaped and Edward died, he's still responsible for Edward's death. It's just the reality of the situation. But let me know what you guys think, because I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts, especially if you guys are like living in the UK and hearing a little bit more about this. If there's an update to Langley's investigation that I missed, let me know, because I would love to see it. Tudor history is just something I'm obsessed with. Not enough for me to like become a Tudor historian, but it's always fascinated me. And not just like Henry and Anne. Don't get me started on that one. I mean, I could go on and on, but don't get me started. Maybe we'll look at that for like a Whip and Chat series. That could be fun. Let me know if you'd like to hear my thoughts about Henry and Anne. For now, this is the end of The Princes in the Towers. This is the end of Mystery Monday. We will be back on Wednesday for a Whip and Chat, and next week we'll have another Mystery Monday. Thank you so much for stopping by. It was great to see you. Remember to drink your water, wear your mask, stay safe. We'll see you next time.